I never thought of myself as a white person. First of all, because the history of persecution of Jews in Europe meant that you weren't white like the other, except that your skin is white, but your psyche isn't. And the influence of the Arab culture around me, which was very, very significant. And so if you combine the European education, the Arab influence, and the Jewish history, that makes for a very interesting situation in which a child like me was looking for his identity and having a hard time finding it. So that was the gift in a way, because as difficult as it was also extremely enriching.
Welcome to the Spiritual Forum, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you're having a fabulous day. This podcast is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening, and all of my guests are here to inspire you in this way. And my guest today has such an interesting story that I think will bring a lot of hope to the world and inspiration and perhaps awakening as well. Before I get to that, I just want to thank everybody who supports this podcast. And don't forget to sign up for my newsletter and check out my retreat at thespiritualforum.org/retreat. And thank you for all who contribute in any way, especially if you engage on YouTube and subscribe. So now my guest, he was born in Egypt and educated in Great Britain and France. Elio Zarmati was a reporter at NBC, a writer-director of films and TV shows in France and the United States. He is a retired CEO of Gelula Co, a Hollywood-based international film subtitling and dubbing company, and publisher of YWD Magazine. Are you still doing that?
No, I sold the magazine as well.
Okay, all right. So he's retired and he's focusing on writing. Elio lives in Tarzana, California, which I mentioned to him before we started recording that I've been there. I regularly go there to have coffee with a friend whenever I'm in Los Angeles. So Elio's memoir is called Goodbye Tahrir Square, and it chronicles his coming-of-age years as a Jewish boy growing up in an Arab land, searching for his own identity in times of revolution and war. Welcome, Elio.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to have you today. When I saw what your background was and the world that you lived in Egypt, I was just fascinating. I thought, wow, you've got something that you'll be able to share with us that help us on our spiritual lives, our spiritual journeys to become the best and most peaceful and loving people possible. So that's why I really wanted to have you on. Before we get into your story, I just have a few quick rapid-fire questions for you so we can kind of get to know you in a personal way. And I was wondering if you could encapsulate your personal message. Like, what would your message be?
Wow, that's a tall order. Well, the message is that my experience is growing up in a country where people got along, not in a perfect harmony, but Jews, Christians, and Muslims shared a life that was rather peaceful. And as a result of first a revolution in Egypt and then a war that involved France, Great Britain, and Israel, the Jewish community basically was gradually demonized, and ultimately it marked the end of that community. And so overnight, collaborations, living together became divisive. And while my classmates and I never bothered, didn't care about the other one's ethnicity or religion, all of a sudden it became an issue. not so much among us, but the government basically decided to mix Jews with Israelis, who were the enemy, and persecuted the Jewish population that was not necessarily political, in most cases not political at all. So what that tells me is, first, friends can become terrible enemies, but it also shows the reverse, that if we did get along for centuries, there's no reason why we couldn't get along again. And I don't want to make that harmony more than it was. There were pogroms and there were hostilities and persecution, but it was very sporadic. And in my view of history, as I heard it from my elders, there was more collaboration than enmity. And the way things have gotten recently in the Middle East have been so awful that I hope it has the effect of turning people around and look toward peace rather than more mayhem.
Okay, so it sounds like your message is that there is possibility to get along based on your experience?
I totally believe that, because I have experienced it, and that was a while ago, but there's no indication that it couldn't happen again. I mean, there are small experiments of Israelis and Palestinians getting together and working toward harmony. There was recently an Academy Award shared by a Muslim Palestinian and a Jewish Israeli, and it was all about potential peace. And so that far-fetched.
Yeah, so we'll get more into that. I'm really looking forward to getting more into it. In the questions, can you share, like, in your life, who has been an influential person?
Oh, many people. A Jesuit priest. Because after the war, the French schools, we were French-speaking originally, and the French school was closed because France was the enemy, but there were French-speaking Catholic schools, Jesuits and Catholic schools, that, because they were subject to the Vatican rather than French government, they were allowed to continue. And so I spent quite a bit of my high school time in Catholic schools as one of the few Jews. And it was a very amazing experience. But there was a particularly one summer camp Jesuit priest that had the most influence on me, because first, as one of the few Jews in the summer camp, I had adjustment issues, but also I was dyslexic at a time when this kind of stuff was not diagnosed. And so nobody seemed to understand why, in matters literary, geography, and all that, I was doing really well. And when it came to math and other stuff, I was less than zero, basically. He seemed to have gotten it. And he really facilitated things for me that had been, before that, extremely difficult. I also had, I was blind in one eye as a kid, which prohibited most sports for me. And he got that, and he designed sports that I could do and excel in. And so I think of him as a tremendous influence. Of course, the greatest influence was my father. who was literary and history buff. And my bedside reading when I was a baby were the classics, the French classics and Shakespeare and whatnot. And so he sort of guided me through things that I would not otherwise have discovered until much later in life. So that was certainly one of the greatest influence.
Okay, yeah, and you write a lot about both of those people in your memoir. All right, the last question I have for you, you've lived in lots of different places, and I'm wondering if you have like a favorite place.
That's the toughest question of all because there's a part of me in every single one. I mean, the three places where I lived primarily were Paris, London, and Los Angeles. And I don't know that I have a preference really, because when I go
Okay.
back, it's like going to two other homes besides my home in Los Angeles. And so I love them all.
That's lovely. Every place is a home where you've been. I like that. Okay. All right. So let's get into your life because your memoir that you wrote is really kind of goes from like age 3 to I can't remember how old you get, 15 or 16 or something like that.
When we
14.
at the time we left Egypt.
Yeah. So what are you so what's so interesting about it is you really have a window from a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old's perspective, and as you grow in age, more and more it becomes more and more fleshed out as it would be because it's hard for 3-year-olds and all to remember. But it is fascinating that you describe your life in this place at this time, which is a unique experience. And so, can you tell us what it was like? You've mentioned about the Suez Canal and that war, but as a child, you really had friends of all different kinds of religions or faith traditions and whatnot, and then and the backdrop is this whole political stuff that was going on
Yes.
in Cairo and in Egypt that really impacted your life throughout that part of your childhood growing up. And can you just talk a little bit about, first of all, I'm interested in what caused you to write your memoir, and then if you can just encapsulate what it was like for you as a child in that place at that time.
Yes. Well, the reason I wrote the book was because whenever I told people I was born in Egypt, they became very confused because we were, my history is a combination of various nationalities that have come together. I mean, there was a time in the 19th century where they were building the Suez Canal, and a lot of people from various places in Europe went to live and work in Egypt. So one of the things that I write about was celebrating Passover, which is celebrating the flight from Egypt with Moses while we were still in Egypt, which was a very odd feeling. And it took me a while to understand that if my ancestors left with Moses, somehow they came back. And of course, as I got older, I understood the history of my people from the expulsion from Spain in the year that Columbus discovered the Americas, 1492, through the Mediterranean basin, meaning Turkey, and in my case, all the way to Italy and France. And so this idea of combining that history and living in an Arab culture was quite a combination, really. And one of the things that really surprised me, because I never thought of myself as a white person. First of all, because the history of persecution of Jews in Europe meant that you weren't white like the other, except that your skin is white, but your psyche isn't. And the influence of the Arab culture around me, which was very, very significant. And so if you combine the European education, the Arab influence, and the Jewish history, that makes for a very interesting situation in which a child like me was looking for his identity and having a hard time finding it. So that was the gift in a way, because as difficult as it was also extremely enriching. And so
I can see that. Go ahead.
I wanted to share that, because what always surprised me was the complete ignorance of people about the history of the Middle East. They seem to have caught it in the last 30, 40 years, but don't know how far back it goes, since Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt under the pharaohs. And the concept that Israel is a European entity is only partially true. It's not false, but it's not the whole story. Most of Israel today are people from Arab lands. And so that history is completely ignored. And so I felt that I had my little grain of salt to add to that. And mostly I wanted to write a big thank you note to my father, because of his tremendous influence on who I am, which might not have happened if my parents hadn't divorced when I was 4 years old, and I grew up with a single father. And so that level of intimacy would probably not have been achieved in a nuclear, typical family with a father, a mother, and a bunch of kids. I was the only child until my mother gave birth to a child in her second marriage. And so all of that was, I felt the need to share it.
Yeah, I think your life I think you described that you're torn between cultures. Then there's all these different languages. And then you had this tear between your parents also that you had to navigate. And it was a lot for a young boy.
It was. And the physical handicap of being nearly blind in one eye and being severely dyslexic. So, but it turned out okay.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Can you share a little bit about what it was like before the Suez War, and then what happened? Because it sounded like it was a very immediate shift that happened there.
Yes. Well, before that, Egypt was never really a colony of Great Britain, but it was a protectorate, which is pretty much the same thing in terms of everyday life. So there was a very strong colonial presence of the British, at the same time as the major cultural influence besides Arabic and Egypt's history was the French school system.
Mm-hmm.
So that we navigated civilizations very easily, and it was totally natural. I was always amazed when I met Europeans or Americans who were born in one place and lived there for the rest of their lives and went to college and all that, because my experience was so multiple. And in a way, I missed a certain level of normalcy, and in another, I reveled in it. I just loved the freedom that I had as a kid. And certainly the times gave me an experience that was quite different, because the middle of revolution and war, on one hand, everything is disrupted rather. And on the other, life goes on. You make friends, you learn about everything you learn about. In my case, it was literature, history, archaeology, and all that. You fall in love, you get rejected, you get lucky. All of that happens in a parallel universe with the horror show of the political world. And that's something also that I wanted to share, because when people hear about war, revolution, they think of a horrendous childhood. It was far from the case. I had a fun childhood in the middle of chaos.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting lesson. I remember watching a World War II movie. I think it was, I can't remember the name of it now. But all of the battles going on, but at the same time, this is in the, it was A Thin Red Line. That was the name of the movie. At the same time, the grasses are blowing, and there's turtles and animals that are crossing, and the filmmaker juxtaposed the horror of war, but also life is going on, and he showed it through nature because it wasn't like in a village, but what you're saying, I think, is that all of this stuff's going on. You're a child, and you're just kind of connecting with people, and you've got friends, and you've got your bike, and
Yeah.
and all of that, and you're still having a good life. So I think that is a really good lesson. The other thing that I thought was so interesting is you're in Egypt. I mean, you're right there with the pyramids and the Sphinx and the Nile River, and you talk about it like it's like, my dad and I just went riding by the pyramids, You talk about it like it was a very normal part of life, and to the rest of us, we're like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely incredible.
It was, absolutely. I mean, we used to go almost every Sunday to the pyramids to ride a camel or a horse, and that was life. I mean, that was normal. I was always surprised by the tourists who came in busloads, especially people from Asia, a lot of Japanese people and all that. So people with a totally different experience from me, and how fascinated they were clicking pictures all everywhere and all that for what to me was everyday life. I mean, I was aware of the importance of the pyramid because there's something magical about the air around them. But at the same time, to have come all the way from Japan seemed a little excessive. Uh, and so the perspective is very different.
Yeah, it really is. It sounds very magical to like the rest of us, the beauty that you were around, and just the ancientness that's just,
Yeah,
we just don't see day to day in the
absolutely.
States.
Yes. That is the strongest memory that I had, was being in a time that was intemporal, if that's a word, because we were in the 20th century, but the presence of antiquity was everywhere. There are pyramids everywhere in Egypt, not just the three major ones. Yeah, you should drive around the countryside, you'll run into small pyramids here and there and all that. And it's like, I mean, it's the norm. And so, so a lot of that, to me, Cleopatra was not a sort of fairy tale, historical fairy tale, but it was what I was in the middle of every day. So my first love was the bust of Nefertiti at the museum in Cairo, because it was such a beautiful statue. At the age of 4, I think that was my first great love.
Wow. Can we talk a little bit about religion for you? Because I think you talk about how you love the stories in the Bible, but you weren't really as into the beliefs.
That's true. Yes. Yes. I mean, my family was very conservatively, yeah, in terms of religion. We celebrated everything, and for my grandmother, religion was everything, pretty much. I mean, and, her life revolved around the holidays and the Sabbath and all that. And for me, it was lovely tradition where brought family together, especially as an only child. I craved for the presence of a bunch of cousins and all that, and we got together. So that marked something in my life far more than the religion. And also I think it's because the way my father presented, he would read a lot of stories from the Bible to me. And it was adventure. I mean, it was, I couldn't see it as part of a religious thing. It was just a wonderful experience of Joseph going into Egypt and all these stories. They were somewhat separated from the practice of religion, which was pretty tedious. I mean, those Sabbath were long evenings of prayer where you were starving before you could get food in your mouth. And that was my perception of religion as a chore, but the magic of Judaism was very present.
Yeah, and I think it carried over into your interest in literature, um, and all of those kind of fantastical stories like the Count of Monte Cristo and, I can't remember, the Three Musketeers or Les
Yes,
Miserables. Maybe it wasn't Les Miserables. Was Les Miserables one,
there
or
was
was it?
part of it, but that was the hard one.
Okay.
The Count of
Yeah,
Monte
and
Cristo
I think
was
yeah.
my Bible, literary Bibles.
I get it. I get it. Have you seen any of the movies that they've made of Count of
Oh,
Monte Cristo? There's a new one that's
oh
out.
yeah, the new one is really remarkable. Yes, I've seen them, and also at some point I was hired by a producer to do a modern time adaptation of the Count of Monte Cristo, which I wrote as a 6-hour miniseries. Unfortunately, the studio politics, the money, and all that did not work out, so it wasn't made. But I had the time of my life writing it.
Wow. Boy, I hope somebody picks that up. That would be really, really interesting. It's such an interesting story.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is, and it
Yeah.
transposed into the 20th century, where I wrote it late in the 80s, was very interesting because the story survived very well. The
Yeah.
time changes and all that. It was such an eternal story.
Well, I think all good stories are eternal stories. And I think that's probably why so many of us like the Bible stories. I mean, even though they may be ancient, they're really talking about human nature and the challenges we have and the
Oh,
struggles that we have and our stories of faith and overcoming.
absolutely, absolutely. And these were my fairy tales of my childhood. It was more the Bible than, Cinderella or whatever.
Hmm hmm
Uh,
hmm
and that I owe to my father's obsessions with history and literature. That was his legacy to me.
That's a big legacy. That's big.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really big. On the same topic of religion, I thought your experience, and you shared a little bit about this in the opening, with the Catholic or the Jesuit priests and the summer camp of the Catholics. I thought that was really interesting because it sounds like you had at least one of the priests was very, very, very good for you, and then others that you were kind of the boy that challenged things that was provocative, asked questions, which I think every faith needs to stand up to questions.
Yeah.
I think if it's just like that's blasphemy. It's not. We all need to dialogue about these things. What do we see as true in this? But I think you hit up
Absolutely. I
on
mean,
some of that.
imagine a Jewish boy of young age discovering that Jesus was a Jew. And,
Yeah.
I mean, you can't not ask questions, but that particular priest took it as blasphemy. And we had a lot of relations.
Yeah. I mean, I think that from what I read, you looked at saw some of the inconsistencies and asked about it. And I'm a unity minister, and I used to have a church, and I had lots of people who had left their faith of origin, their what they were raised in, because they asked questions, and they were that person that asked questions,
Mhm.
and then they got disciplined because they wouldn't just accept it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's something that's really missing in our world now. We need to be in dialogue and asking questions and to discerning what is true and what is not. And it's not like you're throwing it all out, but like, tell me more. How do these two things add up? I can't remember what it was, but you were reading something like in the Old Testament, the Messiah was supposed to be the son of David. I can't remember what it was, and then
Yes.
but then it's like the Son of God. It's like, wait a minute, how where
Yes.
did these two things? How did Jesus become God? And it's a really good question.
Yes. And it wasn't so well received, but, I mean, it, even then, having read the Gospels as a result of being in a Christian environment, I was curious and I read everything I could. And um, for me, the obstacle to my espousing a lot of it really had to do with the Son of God thing. I mean, I, if I had lived at that time, I would have welcomed Jesus as a prophet. But Son of God was a little too far.
It's a big leap for you.
That's right. And
I get it.
there was nobody really I could talk to about that
Yeah.
because dogma was dogma. And, the teacher, the priests who were teachers, were not that open. First of all, they didn't like talking to kids. They didn't feel that we were worth their times, except when they were teaching, but not on an individual basis. And so the reason I really loved Father Sombi, the Jesuit priest, was because he was a child at heart and he could communicate with children. He seemed to not have lost the part of his soul that was still in childhood. So he was
Yeah.
able to communicate with us at such a deep level that I was very lucky to have him as a teacher for that summer.
Well, it's interesting that you're a Jewish boy in a Catholic educational institution in Egypt.
Yes,
It's like,
yes.
it's like, how do all those things go together?
Well, and yes, and in Egypt, in a Muslim environment, at the time when the influence of Islam was growing considerably. It was the time that shortly after the Muslim Brotherhood was created. And I mean, if you look at how secular Egypt was in the 20th century and what it is today, they're worlds apart. I mean, I saw an interesting set of pictures of graduation from Cairo University in '59, the female section of the university. Everybody was wearing colorful dresses, and they could have been anywhere in America, in Europe, whatever. And then at graduation in 2011, I think it was, and everybody was wearing black and had veils, and you could only see a sea of eyes in this huge black dress people. I mean, it was so striking a difference.
That's so interesting. Ultimately, your family Well, your family started leaving Egypt before you and your dad did.
Yes.
And so could you share a little bit about that and what was it that caused everybody to want to leave?
Well, there were the persecutions that started.
What did that look like, though? What did the persecution look
Well,
like?
a bunch of people were expelled because they were accused of Israeli sympathies when they were citizens who were mostly apolitical. Egypt was prosperous enough that people did not feel a need for another home. There were other places where there was severe persecutions. Oh, Egypt hadn't gotten there yet. And so I don't remember anybody saying we want to live in Israel except a couple of my uncles. And because they had really bad persecution experiences. But all of a sudden, the government made Jews an enemy of the state. And so people lost their jobs. They imposed Egyptian Muslim administrators on Jewish businesses. And things changed so that it was either they were expelled or they couldn't make a living. They had to find a way elsewhere to emigrate because life was becoming pretty unbearable. So my family left very, very fully after the Suez War. My father foolishly thought that he could stay and salvage a little bit of the family fortunes, and we ended up being hostage, couldn't get an exit visa for 4 years, so that we stayed 4 years longer than everybody else. And this is the crux of the book, really, because these were the years that I chose to write about. Being in a place that doesn't want you, that you no longer want, but being a prisoner, so to speak.
So what do you think was your lesson out of that? What do you come away with from those years where you felt you were a prisoner and being persecuted and not wanted here, but you were still living your life? You were still,
I
you
was
know, a young
living my
man,
life.
yeah, a young boy.
Absolutely. And I loved Egypt. I hated their politicians. I hated the atmosphere that was created. But, the Egyptian people are the most hospitable, warm people. And I really liked it there at the same time as I was strongly attracted to France because of my French education and the myth of Paris as a literary mecca. And so I was also torn between wanting to live here and wanting to live there at the same time, which was an impossibility. And so, there's something magical about Egypt that even when they hate you and vilify you and whatnot, it's hard to leave. You feel you have to and you look forward. I couldn't wait to leave. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was mourning.
Yeah, I mean, it's in your veins.
Yes.
It's like it's part of your soul. That it seems like you have to extricate yourself from this place that all of it's a part of who you are.
Exactly.
I think that'd be really, really hard. So then when you do leave, though, were you able to kind of like bring that with you, or did you have to kind of like cut it off and start anew in France?
I cut it off completely for at least 20 years.
Okay.
I just forgot about it. And also because I was with a single father, I went to boarding schools. So I was very cut off from the milieu of Egyptian Jews sort of gathering together and all that. I was, in a totally different environment. Plus, I didn't have much affinity with European Jews because of the Ashkenazi Sephardic divide. Culturally, European Jews, like American Jews, are mostly from Germanic type upbringing in Eastern Europe and all that, whereas mine was very Mediterranean. So I didn't feel a whole lot of affinity with that culture. After a number of years, I sort of understood it, and things became normal in both environment. But in the very beginning, I had the bad experience of going to a religious school, a boarding school at first, and being kicked out very quickly because I couldn't stand that rigid environment, and so I was rebelling left and right. Um, and it
You rebel.
ended up being evicted from the school, and so and after that I was in regular schools, not Jewish schools, and so I was separated from that environment. Whereas I see on my mother's side, for instance, they actually came to live in America, in Los Angeles. And I would visit. I was going to school in France and all, but I would visit occasionally. And there was enough of a community of Egyptian Jews for people to get together to celebrate holidays and this and that and the other. I didn't have that experience because I was in French schools that had nothing to do with that. Again, because of most of the Jewish culture being Ashkenazi, which is very Eastern European, and I didn't belong there at all. I was an Arab Jew, so to speak. And so, it was easy to cut myself off from Egyptian culture and all that for some 20 years. And then I gradually started to become curious again about it and wanted to explore that part of my culture. I was 20 years older, more mature, not as angry. And actually, I don't feel angry at all now.
Yeah.
But mostly it's being vilified. I mean, to become the enemy of the state overnight when you're a kid and you don't know anything about what's going on out there, it's a tough experience.
I guess I'm really curious about what your anchor was, because you had a lot of torn between cultures. You had this way you felt like you were treated in Egypt. You had this tearing yourself away from your homeland, and you had a lot of experiences of not belonging and not feeling like you belonged.
Yes.
And I think that's one thing that whoever's listening, I think most of us, while we didn't have your experience, I think most of us have experiences of, I don't belong here. I'm in a place I don't belong.
Yes.
And I'm curious what your anchor was. It sounded like you love the stories in the Bible. Did you have a sense of God or the divine or something beyond you that kind of carried you through all of this?
Yes, very much so. My situation was I didn't like the mechanism of religion, but I had a deep belief that there was a God out there and that he was protecting us. By us, I mean my father and I, basically, because my father had a very difficult time readjusting to a whole other environment, professionally and all that. And I always felt we were protected somehow. And so the sense of spirituality never left me, even though I left religion. I didn't leave it, actually. I just sort of tolerated it because I'm not the holiday and the celebration and all that. But that's all it meant to me, really. Not so much the rituals themselves.
But really, it's interesting because your story is kind of an Exodus story. It kind of is,
Yeah.
it kind of is leaving Egypt. I mean, that was your home, but you did have to leave and adjust to another world. And there's all sorts of spiritual transformations that happen when we change, when we move to new places and leave behind the old and step into something new. And your story kind of mirrors some of the Bible stories, I think.
Well, I mean, I was steeped in Bible stories, so there was never any doubt about my being Jewish and being part of a tradition. But, unlike other ethnicities or religions, Jewish is not only a religion. I mean, you are part of a tribe, and even if you don't feel like it, the rest of the world makes you feel different. And so just the history of the Holocaust and where I know the persecutions everywhere in the world and all that single you out whether you want it or not. So the absence of religion in my daily life did not change anything to my being with ethnically and culturally.
I'm just thinking of the themes of the story of overcoming and walking in faith in a direction and overcoming whatever persecution there is, or being told that you're different or whatever, that you continually went through overcomings and ended up where you ended up telling your story. So I just think that's really interesting. I don't want to lose track of like what's going on in the world now. I do think that everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, most people do not have that full appreciation. I know I don't. Just the history that's there, and the clash of all the cultures, and the history in the Middle East. And so, young people kind of pick up where we are right now and think this is the way it's always been. I think you wrote something about that at one point. I can't find it now, but how we tend to think that how things are is the way things have always been. And so then we make our judgments about, we take sides in the Middle East. But there's something just much deeper and a longer history that most people don't know about. And so right now, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East, which is just pretty tragic. And I don't want to go into the politics of it and the sides and all that kind of stuff. I really want to stick with a spiritual message. And do you have hope? Do you have hope that the crises that are happening now in the Middle East are something that we can work out, and that there is a possibility of a brotherhood amongst different faiths and traditions and whatnot?
I feel that the way it's a question it's something I think about a lot, because for one thing, most of my paternal family emigrated to Israel after their expulsion from Egypt. And so
Okay.
I have family there, and I can espouse their point of view as well as I can be totally furious at the politics of the current government and find that they have totally betrayed the Jewish philosophy in the way they've conducted the war. And again, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of politics, but I can feel very strongly both sides of the story. I hate to see Arab killed. I hate to see Jewish people killed. And so I can only believe that it can get better. Otherwise, it would be total despair.
Yes, I do agree. Otherwise, it would be total despair. I did find this. I think it's that you wrote, most of the people in Midan Tahir are too young to conceive of a world without hatred between Arabs and Jews.
Yes.
And yes, and there is that world that has existed before. In fact, I think you shared that when you were playing with Arab children, that there's no harm. After all, they're all children of God.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's our truth.
Absolutely. And I still very, very much believe that. I think that the relationship is ruined by the people at the top, the politicians or terrorists saying nasty and all that. But fundamentally, the people are people. And they want peace and they want to be with their children, and nobody wants to see their child die in a war. And that still exists. And that is the majority of people. And maybe not in my lifetime, but I think that ultimately the new generation will say enough of this nonsense. So,
Yeah, that's certainly my hope. And it's like we keep doing this stuff over and over and over again. We keep harming each other. We keep dividing. We keep fighting. And at some point, we've got to go, you know what? It's not about my side versus your side and my being right, you're being right. You killed my grandmother or I killed your grandmother. At some point, we've just got to say, you know, we're all children of God. We've got to stop this, lay it all down, and come together in love and peace. That's my vision, and maybe maybe it's Pollyanna,
I
but
don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think.
say more.
I mean, one of the things that gives me encouragement and hope is the fact that both in Israel and in the Arab world, there's been a reaction. I mean, Israel is totally divided right now. There are a lot of people demonstrating against the policies of the current government, and it started in Gaza. People rebelling against Hamas, thinking they're causing too much death around them, and so that gives me hope that at some point the more reasonable people will prevail and establish a more viable environment. It's going to take a long time. And I said, I'm not sure it's going to happen in our lifetime, but maybe it will.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything's possible, and we certainly have to hold on to the vision and have faith, standing and knowing that. To me, ultimately, this is what God, higher power, source, whatever we want to call it, wants for its creation.
Yeah.
And so it's really just about standing in that place and going, well, we can manifest this, we can do it. And I think we need to stop giving up our authority to these people in power, that the religious leaders or whatever it is
Yes.
that divide us, and we need just to say enough is enough.
And I think it's happening slowly, very slowly,
Yeah.
but it's happening. I mean, the demonstrations that you see in the news in Israel are huge.
Okay.
And it's more timid on the Palestinian side, but there's a whole new generation that is fed up because all they've known and all their parents have known is war.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go back one more generation for people to have a memory of peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And you remind us that even in times of upheaval and destruction, that love does flourish.
Yes.
That was one of the points you wanted to make. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel very lucky to have gone through all this and being enriched by it instead of destroyed by it. And I think that has to do with the love of my parents and the love of my friends and the love of the people I've loved. I mean, that's all part of the healing process. That to me is the most important thing when you go through times like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And your life really is a testament to that. I am curious, did you ever go back to Egypt?
No, I wasn't allowed to go for a number of years, actually, until there was the peace treaty with Egypt in the late 70s, in 79 or 80, I think it was, because I had an exit visa with no return.
Oh, yeah.
That was part of the Jewish thing. And when they gave you an exit visa, it was never come back.
Wow. Never is a long time.
Yes. And then people I know in my family who went back said it's so changed you won't. So I wasn't interested in going back until I finished the book. And now, I mean, time is bad to travel to the Middle East right now, but I think I'd like to go back before the end of my life. I know it's
I think that would make sense. Yeah. You've got it's in your veins,
yes.
in your bones. Yeah. Okay. Well, Elio, before we close, I want to give you the last word. Is there something that you would like to share with people who are watching and listening now that we maybe didn't cover?
No, I think you covered everything pretty much. I'm grateful for that.
Okay. Well, I think that everybody has an interesting life. And as a podcast host, I really get to talk to lots and lots of interesting people with interesting lives. And when the request from your publisher person came in my email, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is like a person maybe I pass people like you on the street, but don't know. But it's a fascinating combination of just situations in your childhood that you put together in a memoir. And I think that I think first of all, writing a memoir is it's very you're really authentic. People pour themselves out in it, like you're really sharing your life, your experience. And I think we always learn from that. But then with you in this particular setting of the Middle East and being Jewish and having the Catholic thing and having the persecution and eventually being ejected, very, very interesting. And I think there's a lot of life themes that whether people have had your experience or not, I think that they can really identify and learn from your story. And again, ultimately, the idea that love flourishes, I think, and the fact that we can do this, we can create a world where we all get along. Those are the touchstones that I came away with. So thank you.
So rad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elio. And thank you, everybody who's joined us today. I know you were enriched by this conversation. We'll have everything about Elio's books in the show note. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.